Howdy, it's Jim Arado, and this is March 2021, and we are driving up to Rippavilla Plantation in Spring Hill, Tennessee. It's between Columbia and Franklin, south of Nashville. And this is definitely one of those places that makes me think that, especially Franklin, Columbia, this area is almost a Disneyland for fans of history and those people interested in the Civil War. There's so much history and stuff to do just in this area. Yeah, so we stopped by here recently to give it a tour, and just so you know, the guys that do the tours here, it's a nonprofit organization, and I believe it was the county or the state. The government has not renewed their contract, so as of the end of March, they will not be given tours here any longer. That was a cute little cat going by just a moment ago that hangs out at Rippavilla. That was our guide Jerry, who was just a really nice guy and a lot of fun. Wanted to mention too, they don't allow videos on the tour, so I'm just wanted to put up some of my pictures. So yeah, this will come off as a little bit of a slideshow, but I definitely wanted to talk about Rippavilla briefly, just because it's such a cool place and it has a cool Civil War history. And just a few things to go over about Rippavilla if you're interested. Construction began in 1852. It continued for 3 years, and it was constantly halted and restarted on several occasions. And it was built basically by Nathan Chairs. It's Cheairs. I think it's pronounced like Chairs the fourth, who was dating Susan McKissick, and they got married, and this was their home. By the way, here are people from the organization I mentioned. They're actually packing up stuff to take away from the house because the nonprofit organization owns some of the furniture and the books, and I believe they will be taking those to the Confederate Museum at Elm Springs, kind of in the Nashville area too. I think I heard that. I'm not totally sure, but I think that's where some of the stuff will be on display. And I'll give history. Go ahead and just feel free to look at the pictures. I might interrupt myself to comment as we're going through, but yeah, so Nathan wanted to marry Susan McKissick. And oh, by the way, there's some original photos. They have some stuff that belonged to the family in a case. There's an original photo there in the middle of Nathan Bedford Forrest. Not an original photo, but a copy from that period, a CVD. And I just thought that was interesting. Yeah, Nathan wanted to marry Susan, but his dad, Nathan III, said all the Nathans in the family marry Sarahs. You need to marry a Sarah. So apparently some odd family tradition. And literally offered his son $5,000 to find and marry a Sarah. He did not accept that offer. And then Susan's dad offered all the bricks and slave labor to build a house if they wanted. And he apparently owned a brick company and had access to tons of bricks. There's a cool old mousetrap they have in the house that is from the Civil War period. So yeah, they built the house on this property. His dad ended up giving them the $5,000 as a wedding present, which was interesting. The family lost the Civil War. They lost the home after the Civil War for non-payment of taxes. President Andrew Johnson, a family friend and a fellow Mason, had it returned to them. The house was lived in up until the 1980s. Oh, and this is a dollhouse replica, not of Rippavilla, but of the Mirror House. There's a Mirror House version of Rippavilla across town, and we do go by there briefly when we do a battlefield tour, and I'll put up a video of that here shortly. Interesting about Civil War houses, though, there are a lot of mirror Civil War houses. The previously mentioned Elm Springs, also in Tennessee, there is a mirror house of it kind of across the street from it. It's privately owned, but I think that's kind of interesting. Also, if you go down to Greenville, Tennessee, the Andrew Johnson home, which is operated by the National Park Service, the last person who lived there was a lady who refused to leave unless they would build her an exact copy of the home. So across town, they built an exact copy of Andrew Johnson's home for her to move into. So I think that's neat. Of course, I think there's There's a business out of that home now if you go down there. But it's just interesting that there are a lot of Civil War homes that there are copies and mirrors of. Yeah, just a side note. Neat room upstairs in the home with a lot of relics and information about the family that lived there. And as we're going through talking about the house, up on the second floor, there is a room. Yeah, here we go. I believe in 1959 and 1960, the home was operated as a brothel. Yeah, 1959, 1960. And they have a little room devoted to that period in the home's history. And there is a ledger book, which I'm sure would be very controversial. I'm sure some of the people who visited that place are probably still alive in the area and might have concerns about that book being opened up. So yeah, but anyway, they have this one room decorated from that period, and even they did briefly mention, they didn't dwell on it, but there was a murder that took place when it was a brothel, and there are still blood stains on the floor from that murder. Sounds like a story begging for a book to be written about it. But yeah, so they really don't go on and on about it at the home, but they do discuss it. Also, and I think I was talking while we passed them, there were a couple of beds I know that were shown in these pictures. I do know that John Bell Hood used this home as a headquarter at one point, I believe right before kind of that Franklin campaign and going into Nashville. But yeah, John Bell Hood used the home as a headquarters, and they even had a bed that Bull Nelson slept in. So you had Union and Confederates using this home at different times, which I think is just fascinating. They had kind of a little sunroom here decorated, going along with kind of a 1920s vibe that the house had. And at the end of our tour, they actually took us into the basement, which I thought that was pretty cool. I don't think it was something they usually do on most tours, but I think since they're going to be closing the place up here shortly, they're letting people go down and check out the basement. And there are some of those original bricks from the home. They had a pile of them, and it's something to look at for sure. So anyway, I hope I didn't gloss over too much there. Here's the outside of the house. We're going to drive around the property a little bit. There is an old slave cabin and a slave cemetery and a family cemetery that we're going to go by, and we're driving out to those now. They let you pretty much drive all over this property, and they have kind of little gravelly roads. You might, if you have an older car, you might want to take it because you're driving by some trees and there's some branches that might rub up against your car. Keep that in mind if they're doing tours again. Hopefully Rippavilla will be open for tours at some point. And you can actually go to their Facebook website. I know the Rippavilla, the Friends of Rippavilla, or the Rippavilla Mansion. I forget what they're going under on Facebook, but they do have a little write-up about how their contract was not renewed. So they're basically getting out of the house. They had apparently business was down in 2020, as it was everywhere. They did tell us that I think there were 2 country music videos filmed out there recently, and Jerry did tell us the 2 artists. I'm not up on my modern country music, but they filmed a couple of country music videos out there recently, and it sounded like a really interesting post-Civil War movie was filmed out there very recently. And I know Jerry was actually in it, and one of the other guys we talked to at Rippavilla was in it too, and that sounded pretty cool. I'm going to have to look that up, just because it sounded like such a cool movie. Anyway, as we're driving out to check out a couple of the homes, let me tell you a little bit more about just the general history of Rippavilla. Family lost the home after the Civil War. I mentioned that earlier. Then Nathan he supported the Confederate States of America. He raised 2 companies of men, and at Fort Donelson, he was the kind of go-between guy when General Grant negotiated his famous unconditional surrender, and that message was relayed with Nathaniel. which is just interesting, between Grant and Simon Buckner. And Rippavilla. Oh, there was a rumor that Nathan Bedford Forrest threatened to beat up General Hood on the porch of the home. I'm not sure if that's totally true or not, or just a rumor. I don't think there's a lot of historic information to back that up. So, but I did read that somewhere, and it was finally sold from the family in the 1920s to another family, and it was occupied until the 1980s. And I want to say the car company, the car manufacturer in that area, kind of helped support it for several years up until recently. But yeah, Rippavilla will be, as of the end of March, in limbo. So that's just a little bit of history. Wanted to mention too, I picked up a really interesting book while we were there. It's called Where Elephants Fought, a novel by Bridget Smith, The Murder of Confederate General Earl Van Dorn. Van Dorn was actually murdered in the mirror home that I mentioned earlier, which is it's in Spring Hill, and like I said, I'll show it on the Battle of Spring Hill video that I'll put up later. But this is it's historic fiction, and apparently Earl Van Dorn was a bit of a ladies' man, and while he was in the Spring Hill area, he enjoyed the company of a married woman, and that woman's husband ended up killing him. And in this historic fiction, the author discusses that the how do you put this? The murderer's 16-year-old daughter may have also had a relationship with Van Dorn, which produced a daughter. And yeah, again, it's historic fiction. I'm not sure about the documents to back up the illegitimate child being fathered by Van Dorn. But the author writes an interesting story, and it was fascinating. Lots of weirdness in that book. There's a suicide, there's a divorce, then getting remarried. It's quite a story, and you might want to check it out if you enjoy historic fiction. It's somewhat speculative, and it's always hard when you're reading historic fiction to keep up with what is historic and what is fiction. So keep that in mind, but I enjoyed it as a book for sure. And there is the slave cabin. There's the slave cabin. Looks like they've done some work on it. And yeah, it's just, great that they're still preserving that sort of thing out there. Also, if you do happen to drive through here, there were some confusing signs. I think we were driving around on some private property at one point, and this little gravel road eventually turns into just dirt, and we realized we were going the wrong way. So be careful and make sure you get good directions if you're out in this area. And real quick, I know this is kind of a short video. Let me just read you a little bit about the battle from a historic marker at the house, just to tell you a little bit and set up the scene for you. About 3 p.m. on November 29th, 1864, Union General John M. Schofield realized that his command was in great danger. The bulk of his army was posted near Columbia, Tennessee, while Confederate General John Bell Hood's troops were north of him, approaching the Columbia Turnpike near Spring Hill. To prevent being cut off from the rest of the Federal Army at Nashville, Schofield moved southward. At about nightfall, the leading elements of his army were approaching Spring Hill. General Thomas H. Ruger's division led Schofield's column and soon passed to the north, moving right past the Confederate troops camped here. Union General Jacob D. Cox's division followed, and next came General Thomas J. Wood's division. As these troops passed, they saw the shimmering light of thousands of Southern campfires in the fields around you. The hours ticked by. At about 1 a.m., General Nathan Kimball's division marched north and also slipped away. Finally, at about 5 a.m., General George D. Wagner's division, which had arrived at Spring Hill about noon on November 29th and helped fend off General Patrick Clyburn's movement toward the turnpike, began to withdraw and move north toward Franklin. 5 relatively vulnerable Federal divisions had just marched directly past Hood's Confederates, and perhaps the greatest escape in the history of the war. And yeah, as I was reading that, I did not realize we had made it to the cemeteries. Yeah, this definitely gives you goosebumps. The slave cemetery. It is right beside the family cemetery, and there is a marker here at the front kind of explaining, well, giving a little bit of an explanation and talking about, well, 1986. Yeah, that little monument there explains that the people resting there were reinterred in 1986, and it is very I enjoyed being there. It was nice just kind of walking around and being at that spot. Obviously it would be nice to have a little individual headstone about each person there. It's yeah, you can say what you want. I enjoyed. I was happy to be there. It was just nice being there. Obviously, a lot of people have taken little stones and placed them there. Yeah, it was just very pleasant. And then, of course, the family cemetery was nearby. As we drove out of the property, we noticed that cute little bridge back there. Just a nice little area right through here. Of course, probably right in this area, you had large groups of soldiers going through. Right beside the Rippaville home that's where the sign that I just read to you was at. So you had those Union guys sneaking by the Confederates, right at that spot, which is very interesting, standing there and knowing about that very significant moment during the Civil War. And yeah, so Spring Hill, wanted to mention, I have picked up a flyer, and man, I picked it up a while back. I don't think I've seen it recently. It's a Twilight of an Army guide to the Spring Hill battlefield, Spring Hill, Tennessee. It's kind of a nice glossy pamphlet, and it gives you kind of a driving tour that you can take. It's a 9-stop driving tour. Rippavilla is one of the stops, and it tells you all about the battle and what went on at what time. Really a very, very fun driving tour. We enjoyed this quite a bit. There's a walking tour in a field that you can kind of get out and stretch your legs, walk uphill a little bit. And we did that, as you'll see on the battlefield tour when I put that up, and that was just a lot of fun. Yeah, but more on that later. On this little driving brochure that I found, there's a John Paul Strain painting, Guns of the West, by John Paul Strain. It shows Nathan Bedford Forrest with General Patrick Cleburne kind of collaborating on horses. But anyway, yeah, so there's Rippavilla. I hope you enjoyed it.